Hello, class. Here is our week number 5 of our lessons for this semester. How was your Nearpod? And then how about your reading, your skim reading for chapter 3 in Jensen? Especially look at the critical factor that you are to work on, and you'll be teaching that particular one for your first team teach. And of course, this week we're more focused on authentic assessment, which a lot of it was in your reading from Kagan chapter 15. And then we also had Kagan 7 and 10. So what we're going to do today for this lesson is understand how we authentically assess learners. What does authentic assessment look like in the classroom? And then you will create a rubric. All right. So when we're looking at the rubric itself, in your future assignment, we'll talk about this next week again on how to create it using Rubistar, but you will create a type of authentic assessment tool, a rubric, in how to assess some type of authentic piece of work or assessment that you want for your students. Okay? Also, don't forget to brainstorm about your vision statement and then be looking into chapter 6 about the different structures, because you will have to choose a structure in order to teach your team teach lesson. Okay? Anyways, like I said, Kagan in chapter 10 and chapter 7 is about teams and about team building. Really good little activities and practical suggestions for you. All right, so let's go ahead and get started into the authentic assessment. First off is, let me getting this into the present mode for us, is on this screen you have a link. If you can copy a link or whatever, this is your Google form that you will be answering as we are viewing this video. It's just a way of making sure that you actually viewed this video and was participatory in this lesson for authentic assessment. So the first thing I'd like for you to do is here, and I'll click on this for you, is we're going to watch a quick short video about a school of the future. So here we go.
School of the Future is a 6 through 12 public school in District 2 in New York City. It's located on the corner of 22nd Street and Lexington Avenue in Manhattan.
I have to usually answer why it's called School of the Future after people think we beam people up to the Star Trek Enterprise. But what I say is that School of the Future, although originally was named for Macintosh computers, my partner and I feel School of the Future now is a spearhead of progressive education that is rigorous and accountable.
And we're continuing to be a progressive school, but also to figure out how we are folding in assessment and folding in accountability. I think what makes authentic assessment authentic is that it's actually the kind of work that a person in that discipline would do. A science authentic assessment would challenge the kids to do the same kind of task that a scientist would actually do.
But try to give work that either mirrors what they might be doing later in life, or will prepare them for those kind of tasks, or is simply meaningful to them.
In terms of authentic work within the school, it needs to be something that the student really cares about and that the teacher really cares about. So if we want a school where it's just really making real change and really addressing students in their hearts, then we can't have curriculum that is just going through the motions.
And then the other piece is that making sure that the task is a synthesis type of task that will ensure the critical thinking necessary to feel that rigor is happening.
I think of authentic assessment as a window into the true understanding of the student.
It makes teaching much more efficient. You think that it takes all this time, but in fact it's far more targeted and efficient, and it really speeds things up.
I think first about what are the big ideas I want them to come away with. Some may argue that's curriculum, but I think it's even more fundamental than curriculum. What are the big things I want the students to be able to walk away with?
The key is asking yourself, how will I know? and ask that upfront as you're doing backwards planning. What does that learning look like? What does it sound like? What would I be hearing? What would I be seeing on paper? And then based on that, creating whatever assessment tool works best for you.
When you're starting to plan your curriculum, start with, all right, so what are the 3 assessments then, the 3 big ones I'm going to need to see whether or not they got these skills? And then you can start thinking of smaller assessments on the way there, little check-ins, and then designing the activities that go along with, does this activity that I normally do, does it address what I really want them to understand?
I've been teaching now for about 13 years, and a lot of educational fads have come and gone. But one that I believe is hopefully here with us to stay is precisely this question of how do we know they got it? Before, sometimes it felt like if we taught a great lesson and the students were nodding a lot and maybe writing in their notebooks, we felt good. But now we have to find out, did they actually understand the material we were teaching them? Are they connecting this to their own intellectual interests? Is it authentic for them? Was there real learning that happened there? And I think we're getting better at doing that as teachers. I think we're getting better at doing that.
Okay, let me go ahead and get out of this real quick. All right, so now here's a short piece that's on that Google form, or the Google form that I have. Based on this clip, just jot down some thoughts. It's enough for a paragraph response. What is authentic? What is authentic? If you need more time, you can pause this video. But for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and keep on going with the video. But I just give it some thought. What is authentic to you? Okay. Now, assessment guides instruction. We have to assess. I spoke the other day about how you need to know where you're going to go. For instance, the vacation example I'd given. You need to know where you're going with your students when you're teaching a lesson. You just can't be teaching and all of a sudden assess. You need to have the assessment tool already in mind. How are you going to evaluate? How do you know along the way that they're understanding the instruction? So it's very important that assessment guides your instruction. Because you could be teaching along and they're not getting it, so you're going to stop and reteach or take it a different route so that your students will understand. Okay, so when you hear the word authentic, what comes to mind? Again, you can pause this video for a short minute of time because there's another prompt in your Google form to discuss these terms. What is authentic, which you had a little bit on the previous slide? What's formal and informal? What does that mean to you? Or maybe what did you gain from Kagan's reading of chapter 15? What is an assessment? And we're kind of used to that all the years so far in education. You've been assessed in multiple ways. What are the standards? What is evidence? What is formative? And what is summative? Okay, we'll pretty much focus on the words authentic, formal, informal, formative, and summative. But of course, the standards are given to us. I'm not going to tell you exactly, we've talked about them, but what are these standards that the state has set before us? Okay, so assessment is just a huge umbrella that there's many, many ways to assess a student in how they do something, how they present something, how they're participating in the classroom. And of course, there's the old-fashioned paper and pencil test. But you don't want to gather only one piece of evidence. Anecdotal notes can be a form of assessment. So you want to gather multiple types of assessments with your students to see if they're understanding the material and not just one method. I know a lot of you have, over the years, have experienced only one major form of assessment, and that's usually a multiple choice test or exam. Okay, but it's very important that we get a well-rounded picture of how our students are performing and how are they understanding the lesson. Now, for right here, the Texas Teacher Proficiencies, which when we look in our syllabus, we have the different domains and the competencies and standards that as a college course we must follow. So we have a variety of formal and informal assessments typed in there, but I want you to take a note of our Texas Teacher Proficiency number 2. This is the guide. The teacher's plans integrate learning experiences and various forms of assessment. So we're already tasked as effective classroom teachers that we're not to just use one form of assessment. We need to use multiple forms of assessment. So overall assessment means it is exactly to assess it, to appraise, just like we have property land appraisals, is what is the value. In that form is dollar value, but in this form in education is the education value. And it's constantly ongoing. It's never stopping. That from the day one you meet your students, you will be assessing them. Okay? Usually, especially for those younger learners, and actually it could be for any content area from K-12 all the way through college at any point, and even when you start a job, there's a diagnostic going on, whether it be formal or informal, or in some employers' case, when you're being interviewed, they're diagnosing whether if you're able to handle the job or not. And then, of course, formative and summative. And as I mentioned in class the other day, last week, is that you will always have a summative conference or a summative assessment that is between most likely you and your principal of your campus in your nearby job or near job that you'll have hired on and to be a teacher for the next 20 years or more. So that you always, usually it's March and April that the principal will have you come into the office, and you will have a self-assessment and then the summative assessment with the principal saying, well, okay, this is how you did, this is how I evaluated you, what can we do, should we go to some workshops, how can we make it better for next year? We can't make any changes for this year because it's already done, but how can we make it better for the following year? And look where it says PPR domain, pedagogy and professional responsibility. That's an exam that you will be taking before you can even clinical teach, and you have to pass. So domain 1, designing instruction and assessment to promote student learning. So this is already beginning part of that domain, is you're going to have to be able to design a lesson plan, so that's instruction, and then also design types of assessments, and you'll get more of that when you're in block 2. But all of this, look, standard 1, the teacher designs instruction appropriate for all students that reflects an understanding of relevant content and is based on continuous and appropriate assessment. Okay? So the assessment should include these types of I guess, forms, or it could be formative, summative, informal, but just observations, conversations with your students. Like I said the other day, is I have sometimes when I was working with my 4th graders, especially when they were doing cooperative learning, I walked around with a clipboard or just a note card in my hand so that I could document what types of observations I was seeing while they were working. And then what kind of conversations. Maybe I asked a question or two and the students weren't getting it, so I needed to redirect somehow. Or it could be they were asking me questions which were either they were wanting to look for more critical thinking levels, or they needed to have more guidance. Of course, the good old tradition, quizzes and tests, and I guess we can put our Plickers as part of our traditional quizzes because it's just A, B, C, D answer choices. And of course, you have performances, like you will be doing your team teach. That's a performance you will be evaluated over. And I take a lot of heart, I guess you might say, in how you self-assess. How you self-assess. Actually, over the years, I've found students to be harder on themselves than I was on them. But it's important for you to self-assess. And you will be doing that with your different projects that we're doing in this semester. This semester is you will self-assess. You will peer assess, because hearing feedback from your peers is just as valuable as well. Okay, but again, all gathered over time. So in short, let's review. Now here again, you may want to pause the video, but I do have some Google form questions that's found on the Google form. So data collected, blank or blank instruction. and can be used for blank further instructional goals and objectives and or blank of instruction. Okay, so if you'd like, I'm gonna go ahead and move on, but again, pause the video for you to be able to fill those in. Now I have something I just want to share with you, this link, and you may want to copy this link or save it somehow, but here are just some different types of assessment tools that we could use, and I just thought this was interesting. I found it online, but I've used a Venn diagram a lot. Sometimes, the double Venn or triple Venn diagram when you're comparing, especially when you compare two different topics, or like dogs versus cats, and then there's something that's similar, like they all have 4 legs, things like that, and whiskers. However you want to do your comparisons. But hand in, pass out. Now here, don't get this confused about grading a student's paper. Notice it says, have them respond on notebook paper anonymously. Be very careful. You do not want a student grading another student's paper that has their name on it. What violation is that? Yeah, it's FERPA. We do not want to violate FERPA. Students can grade their own papers in class, but students are not to grade other students' papers. And I do think grading papers in class, their own, it really, don't worry about it. Oh, they're going to erase their answers and they're going to get the right answer. That's not, the whole process is actually step by step, and working with them, especially in math, is they did this for homework. It's not important that you take a grade on the homework paper. You may once in a while actually pick up the paper and grade it yourself, but having them correct their papers is very valuable whenever evaluating, because you can tell. If you want to, you just make sure all your students have a certain color pen instead of a pencil on their desk. That way they can't be erasing it. There's other ways of getting around that. But, right here, be very careful. Do not grade others' work unless it's anonymous. There are no names on that paper. Visualize. Notice we talked about in our multiple intelligence and our different preferred learning styles, a lot of us were very visual, kinesthetic as well. So maybe have them draw. I remember one time I had my 4th grader, we were reading Mary Poppins, just an excerpt that was in our reading text, not the whole novel or anything. But I had asked the students to draw this one little area. It's where Mary Poppins was looking in a 3-way mirror. It had 3 panes, and she was all dressed in blue. I had one student draw me a basketball player. Well, that stopped me right away, and just to find out, was he drawing because that's what he saw, or was he drawing because he was bored and wanted to doing something else? So there's some things you learn a lot from your students when you have them illustrate some things. Okay, of course, we have quizzes, having students write it down, and here is having, sorting out your answers by yes and no piles. So that's another one. I won't click on that for right now, but you might want to be able to take this and click on these, highlight, and save those links or something. Whiteboards, I used mini whiteboards all the time, especially in my math class, or even when we were doing writing and learning to write compound sentences or finding the nouns and the action verbs and things like that. But creating, I'm going to just kind of go quickly for a few of these. Course extension projects, we always hear about extension projects, and a lot of times giving them to GT students or your gifted and talented students, but really even your struggling learner can use these and be very successful in them. And also you will be able to see what they exactly know about that content that you're trying to teach. Again, back to drawing, let them doodle, okay? Chalkboard splash, text rendering. This is one I've used kind of in a, exit slips are kind of in different formats. It doesn't have to be exactly the 3, 2, 1, but this is one that I've used in the past, even for college, is what are some things you learned? Just three things, 2 things you found interesting, and 1 question you still have. And if you wanted to turn those labels or topics a little bit different, that's fine. You can make it your own. And I believe it's a little further on in here is called Socrative, which is very similar to the exit slip. Now, running records, a lot of you, when you're in Dr. Sloan's 3311 right now, you'll be working on running records and being able to keep tracks of mistakes when it comes to reading. This is a good one, thumbs up, middle, or down. So that way you can, just have the class respond. Now on this one, I'll make sure that it's kind of in the middle of their chest and not up in the air, because what's happening when they're up in the air? Everybody's looking around to see what everybody has, but if you have it in the middle of their chest, that way you who is standing at the front of the room looking at them sees what's in front of their chest and not their people beside them or behind them. Okay, so that's a good one too. Hand thermometer, they could use some, that's of course having to be more, having your hands up or closely to you to do that visual. 2 roses and a thorn. I haven't used this, but it's very similar to an exit ticket. Fingers up, that's very similar to your thumbs up. Red, green cards, I've used this before, but this one, I would prefer them hold it in front of their chest and not out and up in the air so that everybody else can see if they have a red card or a green card. Traffic lights, I've seen, this very similar to the red, green card. It's just now you have the yellow, just like your traffic light. And Google Forms, kind of what we're doing today, right? So I'm checking to see if you're participating and getting it, and that way I can come back and check with you a little later on. The clickers, a Flubaroo, again, another way of checking. Cold calling, text the answer. That's really fun too, is you can have everybody text to that Google link or to your Google link, so that way it's not that nobody knows who's asked or who's making a response. So all types of different ways of checking for understanding or for assessing. It doesn't have to be paper and pencil all the time. So just a little bit to here's that Socrative I was talking about. Crowdsource presentation, photos, okay. Create a video, kind of what I was trying to do when we did the seesaw. Let's create a video. Nobody really did, but y'all did the drawings. Talking to each other, just turn to your shoulder partner and you walking around and listening to their statements and asking them a question or answering a question from them. Okay, partner quizzes, teach someone else, rotate. So jigsaw groups, we've done this before. Okay. First raised hands, just listening. Okay. So anyway, this is different, like I said, different ways for assessing, self-assessment. Okay, and that's all of that one. So let me go back to our presentation here. Did y'all get those already? So we go. Now, there is a big difference between what is summative and what is formative. So summative assessment, just think about how that word is written. Sum. Oops, sorry. Let me tell it to wait an hour. Summative assessment. That if it's summary, like a summative summary of a book, when do you write a summary of a story that you've read? It would be after you've read the story, not before you've read the story, not even during during the story time. You read your story, read your book, and you write a really quick summary of what that was about. So that's the same thing as what summative. It's at the end of your lesson. Okay, it can be formal, like a test, or it can be informal, just asking questions, having discussions. And so what you're doing is gathering, have the students understood it, okay? And it says it takes place after instruction, okay? So authentic assessment. It evaluates students' learning by having students, okay, here's another Google question, blank a specific skill, blank a product, or solve a problem that could be generated from a blank situation. So again, you may want to pause this video so that you can fill these in on your Google form and respond and submit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So some authentic examples. Models, building models, using modeling clay, having students stand up and demonstrate, having maybe a science trifold board and showing what they're talking about with either pictures or drawings or articles, things like that. A performance, for instance, music. Don't we perform using music or having band contests, things like that? Portfolios. Who uses portfolios in the real world? Portfolios. Maybe an architect, maybe a model, someone who is a designer of clothing or designs, that they would have a portfolio put together. And then, of course, products, having a real product developed. Okay? Now, something I'd like to bring out in this is, look at this little cartoon, is you need to make sure that what your students are doing as a group or in a learning situation is that the assessment is appropriate for one, either the task or the student. For instance, it says, what tasks did you get? Well, I'm going to wash 5 test tubes. But the other child is having to launch a satellite? I mean, that's a little bit a little heavy there to expect one person for that's their assessment. Now, with that being said, though, is if you have a gifted and talented student, their assessment should be more geared to what they're capable of doing, the same as if you have a struggling learner. Now, I'm not saying give the hard always to the GT student and always easy. It was a science class that I just had a bag full with a battery, a light, and wires, and I think you know where I'm going with this. They had to create their own circuit and have the light shine. No instructions. I found it very interesting that my struggling learners, which happened to be more kinesthetic learners as well, they were able to put together and create their circuit before my gifted and talented students. I found that interesting. So authentic assessment products are usually evaluated with rating scales. Now, band does this all the time. When marching contests, usually a 1 to 4, where you rate it. You may have heard something about Likert scales, the same thing. It's you choose 1 is the worst and 5 is the best. Now, rubrics, and I know you've seen these before, and you'll see a lot of them in this course, where it has a description of how you want the product to, how you're going to grade the product, and we'll talk about these in a little bit. So you have, usually it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That 5 was outstanding. That's exactly what you wanted to see, and they included everything that you expected. And then 4, they almost included everything. And then 3 is, well, it's about general. It's right kind of there. A 2 gets a little worse because that's only 2 points. And they only put maybe 1 or 2 items that you expected to see out of 5 or 6. And then, of course, 1 is they barely submitted what you expected in your product. Now, just from experience, having a rubric presented when you start the assignment is the best for your students. That way, 1, they know how they're going to be graded and they know what your expectations are. And then they choose, do they want to earn full points or do they want to earn minimal points? And the ball is in their ballpark, okay? It's with them to make that decision. But we'll be talking about that. And of course, some people use checklists. A lot of coaches or PE coaches, let's put that, when they're assessing students on their skills with basketball or whatever, maybe their timing when they're running laps or things, is that they checklist. They just check, okay, got it, just what they did it or not, okay? So what types of authentic assessments have you experienced? Just think about that. What are some authentic assessments you've experienced so far up until now? Okay. So here's one that you probably had, the STAR test. Okay. That's an assessment. You were assessed whether you should be able to go to the next grade or not. Some school districts would hold that for you. It's just a one day shot in time of your learning to assess if you knew everything for 1 grade level. But what kind of assessment is it? What kind of assessment is it? And do you think that one test that's a day in April, let's say, that's scheduled in April, will show you as a teacher everything the student knows about that particular content? Okay? I mean, sometimes students, and maybe yourself, have testing anxiety. So it's not, that's how you take that into account, whether or not if they are able to test or demonstrate everything that they know in that one test. The other is how it's written or how it's presented, how the questions are asked. Okay? All right. So now a cooperative learning project during the guided practice. Remember we talked about the different parts of the lesson cycle during guided practice. Which one of these? So here again, I have a Google form for you to fill in. Which one or more than one do you think that cooperative learning is assessed during guided practice? Do you think it's formal? Do you think it's summative, formative, informal, traditional, and authentic? So it's more than one. So if again, pause the video if you think you need more time to type this in to your Google form. A 6 weeks test that uses a multiple choice format is defined as a 6 weeks test. Okay? So what do you think? The 6 weeks test. Well, being that's multiple choice, we're going to call this more of a formal assessment, right? What about summative? It's at the end of the 6 weeks. So I don't think we're going to go back and reteach the 6 weeks over again. So it's going to be considered summative. Definitely curriculum based, because it's based on the curriculum that you were teaching for those 6 weeks. Informal. Well, if it's formal, more than likely it's not informal because you're using a multiple choice format. Traditional? Yes, very traditional. We've been seeing multiple choice tests for a long time. Authentic. Some people will think it's authentic because maybe you created your own multiple choice exam, but it's not very authentic. It's not, you're not going to go to, let's say, outside into the garden and have to prepare or have to answer a multiple choice exam in order to plant your rose bushes. So it's not something that we'll really see in the real world other than inside a classroom. Okay, what about the STAR test? The STAR test. Which of the following would that be? Okay. Now on this one, I like to always laugh at it. They think it's authentic. You will hear people who write the STAR test saying, oh yeah, it's authentic. It has little scenarios about, real children or fictitious real children. So they'll say it's authentic, but it really isn't. It isn't. Of course, it's traditional these days because we've had state exams for quite a while. Okay? Let you continue thinking about that. The Texas, that's the Texas Examination of Educator Standards. That's what that stands for. Texas exam. This is the one you'll have to take for your core exam. Very formal, lock and key formal, just like the STAR test is under lock and key. It is very summative. It has to be, it sums up everything you know about that content. Okay? It's not formative unless you've taken the test a couple of times. If you failed it and you retested, well, then the previous tests become formative because now you have an idea of what that test is like. But at $150 a pop, I think you ought to take it and pass it the first time and let it just be a summative exam. Okay? It's not informal because you can't just walk in there and have your music playing and talk to anybody. It's very formal. Traditional, yes. I had to take this exam in order to be qualified and certified to be a teacher. Again, they think it's authentic, but it isn't. And yes, it is curriculum based. Okay, what about student teaching? What about student teaching? Think about what you're doing when you're out in the field. Okay? They're actually, I don't remember if I put a Google form on our, Google form question with this or not, but we'll talk about this. it can be formal and summative. Formative and summative, because during your student teaching block, your university supervisor and your mentor teacher will be evaluating you using a rubric, using a checklist, but then after their evaluations 1, 2, and well, usually 1 and 2, is that they're going to sit down with you and talk about maybe the good points or maybe how you need improvement in some areas. That's where it can be formative. But that very last evaluation during your student teaching or clinical teaching semester, that's going to become summative. Do you see the difference? Because you can make some changes. Let's say you had your first evaluation out in the field in, let's say, the end of September. And then the middle of October, your supervisor came again. Well, between those two, that at that first one, your supervisor will talk about what you did well and maybe some needs of areas of improvement. So that becomes formative because you can change and make improvements as you're going. It can be informal because maybe they're not filling out the evaluation, but after you've done a little teach time, then they have a discussion and said, oh, this worked really well, but have you thought about doing this? So it can be very informal where you just talk about it. It definitely is traditional. There has been student teaching evaluations for, well, a long, long time. Okay. And then definitely is authentic. It is real world. You're in a real classroom with real students. And so that is a very authentic assessment. Okay. Now, we're going to move into how to create a rubric. And I'll end this video and bring up another one so that we can have just short video clips on some things. But first off, before I go on or stop here, is you need to determine the criterion for the product. What are some pieces that you want to look for? Now, you're going to pick more than just one piece to look for. For instance, let's make a simple one as an essay. Well, you know you're going to look for spelling, grammar and mechanics, that's one. Maybe you're going to score their introduction. Maybe you're going to score their main points, the 3 parts of the body, the pre-paragraphs of the body. Maybe you're going to look for transitions, how that from one paragraph to the next paragraph or idea to idea transitioned smoothly. Did they use transition words? Maybe you also are going to look at the conclusion. You're going to look at the conclusion of things, or your paper. So that right there is already 5 criterion that you're going to grade, you're going to have on this rubric. In other words, 5 rows, okay? So then now, once you figure out what you want that you're going to grade on, then establish the performance indicators. And these have to be numerical because, yes, you're going to use words like fantastic or exemplary or proficient if it's pretty good, satisfactory, or needs improvement. Those are performance indicators by adjectives, but you need to establish numbers, digits. For instance, if it's exemplary, they earn 5 points for that row or that column. Or if it is, proficient, it's okay, but not perfect. So maybe they're going to get 3 points for that column. And then if they just turned in something that they sort of attempted, but it didn't hit the mark, maybe 1 point for that column. Then you could have to where it is, they turned in nothing, then they should have 0 points, correct? They turned in nothing, so that column will be nothing. Or maybe they did not have the introductory paragraph, so 0 because it wasn't there. Okay, they just started talking about their 3 main topics. And what I have in my mind right now is the vision statement or your vision essay that you're working on. Okay, so the levels of performance should be described. It's performance indicators. All right, we decided if we want exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, then we need to describe them. And I always start with the best first. Describe that. For instance, included for introductory paragraph. The student had an introduction that grabbed my attention. Of course, you'd word this a little differently. Grab the attention of the reader, stated a thesis statement, so you have things built into that description. Then it moved down is slightly grabbed my attention or the reader's attention and began a thesis statement. Then the next level would be did not grab the reader's attention, no thesis statement provided. So notice how you're moving it down slowly from the best indicator to the not so well done indicator, right? So you always describe the best for each product, then go to the worst. You know, which one would earn the 1 point, and then do the between the two. Now, when you can, be as numerical as possible. For instance, let's take the grammar mechanics. For the best product, I'm going to say had no mistakes or grammatical errors, no spelling or grammatical errors. Okay, it's perfect. Then for the 1 point, maybe I'm going to say there were more than, let's say, 8 spelling and grammatical errors. So you have the number 8. So you have 0, no mistakes is perfect. The worst one, you're going to say 8. Well, I have 2 columns in between. That is the next almost perfect. Maybe I'll say that there were 1 to 3 grammatical and mechanical mistakes. Okay, so I have 1 to 3. And then my other one is 8. So in between that, maybe 4 to 7 grammatical mistakes and spelling errors. So notice I go from 0, perfect paper, no mistakes. The worst paper, the worst performance is more than 8 or 8 or more. Then in the middle 2 performance levels is if I had the 0, there was no mistakes, then I went into having what I say 1 to 3 mistakes, and then the next level 4 to 7 mistakes. Okay, do y'all see how I do that between the 2 extremes? Okay. Now, this is just a lot of times our rubrics are more than just 3 or let's say 4 columns and 2 rows. I mean, usually I'd have at least 4 indicator columns, and then I'd have my criterion rows. Criterions are usually in rows. So my is where it says dimension definition should be clearly defined. Then performance labels, description, continuum, that's my criterion. So my top criterion, maybe it is about spelling and grammatical mistakes, or spelling and grammar. Then the next one could be about the introduction. You don't need a bunch of wording in this area. And then so excellent, then the target, and poor. You're going to see this written other ways, or I call it backwards, that they would go 0, 1, 2 from left to right. But I always like to start with the best indicator first, excellent first. Why do you think we should start with the best performance indicator in that second column on this rubric? Okay, if you said, well, that's the first thing you read because we normally read from left to right. Okay, so our students are reading the criterion, then they're going to read what you expect to have to make that criterion. So you really want them to read that very first column, or second column in this case, of what that excellent indicator is for 2 points. You don't want them to read the worst one first, because maybe they'll just stop reading there and say, okay, that's all I'll do. Okay, does that get that? So what I'd like for you to do, if you're meeting together in teams today, or if you're on your own or something, you'll eventually work with your team in a authentic assessment, creating your own rubric, or you can do it on your own. This is up to you, but notice I have independent practice on here. Being that this is a video, not in the classroom, I didn't get to go all the way through with the actual lesson cycle, but it would be nice that, we had the instructional delivery, we would have guided practice, which I would have had a handout for you to work on a grid, which I want to put this up in a little bit. Then now you'll work on your own to make your own rubric. Now, if there are any questions, I'll see about you could do the Q&A in Canvas. If you have questions or anything, I'll respond as soon as possible with that. But I'm going to come back and get you the rubric in just a bit to load that up so that you can see just a basic rubric. But really, all I did to create my rubric is I created a table in Microsoft Word. And the number of rows depends on how many criterion I want. And the number of columns depends on how many performance indicators I want to use. And in this case, I think to make it kind of simple for us is this time, make it 3 or 4 performance indicators, like use the word exemplary, maybe the word proficient, maybe the word satisfactory, and then maybe the word unsatisfactory. But think about your level of your students. If you have little kindergartners and first graders, are they going to understand what exemplary and proficient mean? Maybe you want to use smiley faces and a sad face in there. So you can use some other types of visuals for your students to understand what the performance indicator levels are like, okay? So anyway, this was our lesson about authentic assessment. And now let's go into, this is part of our questions on our Google form. Why is it important to use authentic assessment? And what will you use that you've learned today and why? Okay? What will you use? What did you learn? So it's almost like our ticket out the door using our Google Doc, our Google form actually. Okay? Again, pause so that you have some time to respond. Now I'm just going to move into team planning just very briefly. Is if you're together, that'd be great. If not, make sure you work together. Is take time to look and talk to your team about who might be doing what part of the lesson cycle. You will need to have, if it's a team of 4, you'll need to have focus and closure is the same person. Then someone will need to be the instructional delivery, someone else the guided practice, and someone else the independent practice. Okay, now if there are 5 on a team, then it's kind of obvious there's 5 per section. Now, just jot down some ideas, what the content you're going to teach, and in this case, it's going to be one of the critical factors that you've either chosen or been assigned. It'll be the critical factor, okay? And so you'll only pick out a certain amount, like 3 to 5 important pieces that Jensen has to say about that critical factor. You don't have the time to read what he says word for word. So pick out the important things or the important message. Okay, and also each one of you will have to have a structure. Now, if you are doing the focus and the closure, you only need one structure, and you may use it at focus time or at closure time or for both. It's up to you. Okay, but everybody has to have a different structure to use during your lesson. No, you don't have to have a different one from everybody in the classroom because we won't know this. But look through your chapter 6 in Kagan and find a structure. And at this time, why don't you be ready for next week? Have 2 or 3 that you like so that when your team gets together, then maybe somebody has already chosen quiz trade. You go, oh man, I was going to do that, but I have another one. Okay. So we're going to talk about team planning. We're going to do more details in this next week. Okay. Now, the team presentation itself is only 10 minutes long, period. From start to finish is 10 minutes long. Okay. So that kind of tells you have about 2 minutes per lesson cycle portion within your presentation. Because there's 5 portions, 10 minutes, 10 divided by 5. Is 2. Now, remember I also said that focus and closure are very short, and that time can be handed over to whomever is doing the instructional delivery. That part needs a little bit more time, okay? And you need to work closely together, and you have to help. Everybody has to help the instructional delivery person. You're really the anchor. Y'all to work together, decide what do you want to teach, because the instructional delivery person delivers that content. Focus has to frame it and get us shadowed into what we're learning and not without teaching it first. The 2 practices, guided and independent practice, you have to practice exactly what the instructional delivery was about, okay? So yes, it's repetitive, but that's what the lesson cycle's about. But again, we'll talk more about that. So here we go. And I know I have on here, if you go over a little, that's okay, a few seconds, but we're not, if you go past 12 minutes, I'm cutting you short, and so that means closure person won't get to present, and that won't be right for that closure person. So we'll need to be very mindful of our time, okay? And the focus person, make sure you grab our attention, foreshadow, and remember, it could be a picture, it could be music, it could be a quick video clip. You could have us do some type of quick little activity or turn to our shoulder partner or something. Be creative about that, okay? All righty. So that's where this is where I'm going to stop for today, or for this clip, and then I will have another little clip in a little bit, okay? I hope this went well for you. If not, please feel free to email me. Use the Q&A inside our Canvas, so that way we can all be, I can answer your questions and things like that, okay?
You still doing the video?
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
I was. Yes, I was.